Well, this is Brent Allan Winters, commonlawyer.com, www.commonlawyer.com, and I'm here with former state legislator and elder at the End Church, Dan Scattom.
And I think you have a course coming up on comparative law.
Course coming up on comparative law, scheduled to begin on the 10th of January, the 10th of July 2025, coming up pretty quick. A course on comparative law, comparing and contrasting our law of the land with the law of the city. The law of the city, that other tradition of religion, law, and government that governs every country in the world, if not directly, indirectly, with the exception of the few common law countries. commonlawyer.com, you can sign up for the course there. Dan posed some questions, and he's done that yet. He's going to do that yet again today, concerning the grand jury. By the way, you can buy the book by yours truly on the grand jury, the jury in general. The principles of the jury are fundamentally the same, but the grand jury and the jury have different purposes, but they operate according to the same common law principles. Well, Dan, you'd mentioned you had questions you thought would be good for the listeners. What do you have in mind?
Well, from what I've read and heard you talk about, it doesn't seem like our jury system and especially the grand jury is operating like you've said it should have and was designed to be. So how do we get back to that?
Well, one thing that a fellow can do is go down to the courthouse or call the courthouse and say, how do I get on the list for the pool of the grand jury? As I'd said in the other presentation concerning the grand jury, nothing's taught about it in the law schools. It's kept relatively secret. The grand jury is, by law, secret what goes on in the grand jury. There have been books written recently about the grand jury to try to help people understand, especially the federal grand jury. Some states use the grand jury, some don't. Some do it by discretion. The state's attorney might have discretion whether or not to impanel a grand jury, or just go ahead and indict himself. You do it himself. Well, what can you do to make it work? Number one, make sure your name's on the list. Make sure your name's on the list at the courthouse in your state. You could also call the federal courthouse and ask if your name's on the list there. Probably already is, but I don't know. It's not something that's widely known, is it? No, it's not. And people talk about wanting to form their own grand juries. There's nothing wrong with doing that as long as you're not impersonating the grand jury that is under that indicts because the U.S. prosecutor or the court has impaneled the grand jury, has seen to the administration of it. Of course, the courts are not the grand jury. But I have known people, Dan, that have been indicted because they participated in a grand jury that the federal prosecutor said was an attempt to imitate the real grand jury. By the way, be careful about that. Here's what happened in that case. I can think of two states that happened in. They formed their own grand jury, but then they called the courthouse and the powers that be and said, we need you to provide a room for us, tables, writing pads, telephones. Well, when they did that, then the prosecutor got to thinking, I don't want this going on. We're not going to provide it. They're acting like they have authority to tell us and demand from us that the taxpayer ought to support them. And so in those cases, some of those men and women were indicted and tried for crimes. I don't know, didn't follow up on it. I know some of them called me and wanted me to defend them, but I wasn't licensed in the particular jurisdiction to do that. I don't think they had any way to support me while I did it anyway. If you can't support a lawyer while he's doing things for you, it's unlikely he's going to do it. He's got to live too, and if he just goes and does everything for nothing, He'll starve to death, and so will his children and his wife. That's not realistic to expect that. But in all of these cases, it's important that you make sure down at the courthouse that your name's on the list. And then if you get called for grand jury duty, keep in mind that you're there to indict and not the federal prosecutor or the state's attorney. You are in the driver's seat. And it's your job to make sure that the rest of the jurors that you're serving with understand that if they don't. And don't expect it all to be friendly and nice. It might be, it might not. They may hate you to death. They may like you a lot. But it's your job to make sure that they know if they run off, they say things like, well, we trust the prosecutor. Whatever he says, he's our man. We'll go with him. He's our lawyer. That's what grand jurors sometimes think. Well, he's paid by the taxpayer. He's our lawyer, and it's our job to stop crime. And whatever you believe to be right and true, and whatever you want done, we'll do it. That happens in most cases. As Representative Henry Hyde, who headed up the Hyde Commission to study the grand jury many years ago, after he got done with the study of the grand jury to deliver a report to the President of the United States, he concluded that a grand jury with a U.S. attorney with a grand jury could indict a ham sandwich. Why? Well, the attitude of grand jurors is we're working for the government now, and we just trust the U.S. attorney and we'll do what he tells us. Now, that's not always true. It took 3 grand juries to indict yours truly. 3 grand juries. They couldn't get it done the first time, and time was up, and they had to dismiss that grand jury. They tried another one, same thing. They dismissed that grand jury. And I don't know, I've never checked up on it, but I suspect they stacked the 3rd one. That's often what happens, because who checks up on them? If you're not checking up on the government and you don't have a way to stop them, they'll do anything they want to do. That's the way it always works. Don't think it's the exception. No, it's the rule. It's the absolute rule. Now, they may be doing the right thing. They may not be doing the right thing, but they'll do what they want to do. And in time, those in government will do what's good for them. Always. I said always. No exceptions. And if you were there, you'd end up doing the same thing. You think you're immune from temptation? You think after you watch all the stupidity of people and all the letters they write you, if you're a government official, you telling me you won't get to thinking people don't have any brains at all? Dan, you've been a state legislator. Did anybody write you letters? Yeah.
A lot.
A lot?
Yeah.
Well, you want them to write you letters as a state legislator.
Mm-hmm.
And because that means they're engaged, and you want to be nice to them and respond to their letters. And then, I'm not going to ask you to say this, but I've watched long enough to know that most of what people write, the letters they write, are just, most of it is just, has nothing to do with what they're trying to get done. And they're asking the legislator to do things he doesn't have power to do. And maybe they should be writing somebody else instead of him. But you don't tell people that when you're elected to public office. You don't tell people they're stupid, they don't understand government. No. You never say that. But if you're a juror, you're not responsible to the public. You didn't get elected to that position. And here's the point, Dan. A legislator is elected to his position. He wants that job. And because he wants it, he talks people into it. He campaigns hard. He spends maybe 100, 200, 300,000 on the federal level, $1 million. I ran for Congress. We spent over $1 million, and that's been 30 years ago. We want the position. A juror, a grand juror, he doesn't ask to be on the grand jury. They don't pay him anything. And while he's there, it's a secret proceeding. He's not out campaigning, telling people he's on the grand jury. He'd really probably rather be making money than being on the grand jury or doing what he wants with his family. It's like being a soldier in World War I. You get paid $1.25 a day, and you just hope you get through it, and are able to get home and do what you want to do. But it's a duty, and you do it, and you're patriotic about it. Well, that's the way a grand jury is. Not really any big advantage, except to think that you're helping freedom by not allowing the government to indict somebody and try them without I almost said probable cause, Dan. That's not it. without the evidence being beyond a reasonable doubt. That brings up another point about the grand jury. I'm going to mention it quickly. At common law, the standard for grand jury indictment is the same as the standard for conviction in trial, beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, the federal courts, and the federal prosecutors, and the Congress of the United States has said otherwise. No, the standard for the federal grand jury is more likely than not. And that's the conventional wisdom. Most people think that. It's not true. It's never been true. And I don't care what Congress says. I don't care what the Supreme Court says. If I'm on the grand jury, that's what it's going to be, because that's what the law has always been, and it's right. And I'm not bound by any statute, if I'm on the grand jury, to evaluate the case before me according to anything the government says. That's another point. No, you do it according, if you think the statute is wrong, that they're telling you the target of the grand jury has violated, that's up to you. If you think the legislator is wrong, or you think the legislator is right, or you think the prosecutor is wrong or prosecutor is right. We used to have in America what we called runaway grand juries. Runaway grand jury, what's that? Back during Prohibition, that got real popular. They'd bring somebody in for violation of Prohibition, and the grand jury would say, we're tired of this. It's stupid. So here's what we're going to do, Mr. U.S. Attorney, Mr. State's Attorney. We've decided we're going to investigate you instead. So bring in all your financial records. And we got some questions we want to ask you. Well, why? I'm not the subject. Do what you're told. And do it now. That's our job, to investigate crime. Well, they got to calling that a runaway grand jury. They really weren't a runaway grand jury. They were investigating. That's what the grand jury is supposed to do what they want to do, not what the prosecutor tells them to do. The prosecutor will get in the grand jury room and tell you, and give you the impression that he's in charge, or she or it, or what kind of an animal they got in there. Don't believe them. Matter of fact, I would say you should tell them, get out of this room and don't come back. That's your prerogative. The grand jury room belongs to the grand jury, not the prosecutor, not the court. No, that's separate from the court. And if you want to investigate the judge, you want to investigate the U.S. attorney or the state's attorney, you want to investigate some other person out in the private sector, you want to investigate some congressman, you want to investigate anybody, the dog catcher. That's the prerogative of the grand jury, and that's the point we should get across. Now, I'm using a little bit of hyperbole. I don't believe you should just do things as a grand juror just because you can. That's what the government does. Don't be like them, but just be looking for wrongdoing and investigate it. That's all. If you think there's something that needs to be investigated because you've been reading the newspapers, just say, no, we want to investigate that. And we're wanting to send out a subpoena, and the prosecutor or the U.S. attorney has the responsibility of making subpoena of the things that you want. They work for you, my friends, if you're in the grand jury. And if you want to enforce that subpoena, that judge will enforce it for you. That's his job. He didn't run the grand jury, but he enforces the subpoenas that you put out there. He's supposed to do that. Do your own investigation. Here's another thing, Dan. The rules of evidence. The rules of evidence at common law that apply in a trial don't apply to a grand jury. No, everything is admissible. If you want it to be, hearsay, all you want. Anything. The rules of evidence are not required at the grand jury level. But nonetheless, the standard of proof, I hasten to add, is beyond a reasonable doubt, even for indictment. At common law. I know, I'll say it one more time, your state legislator or your U.S. attorney or the U.S. attorney or the prosecutor may instruct you otherwise. Well, I know what the law is. That's not the law. And just because the legislature says something doesn't mean it's true, does it? Does it mean it's true because the government says it? No. And just as often as not, they're lying. Every time the legislator, national or state legislature, puts up a bill, they name it the opposite of what it does. I mean, lying is the culture of government at every level. No, I'm not using hyperbole at this point. That's what politics is about, is saying one thing while you're thinking quite another and getting people to believe the opposite. That's politics at every level, whether you're the good guy or the bad guy, the white hat or the black hat. This is war. War without bloodshed. And all the rules of war apply, whatever you can get away with it, and that's what they do, whatever we can get away with. Now, Dan, I know you probably didn't engage in that kind of activity, but I'd like to hear you say this point I make about government. The grand jury is there to restrain government, to say yes or no to government. That's the only reason they're there. Yes, you may indict this person and try them and take their life, liberty, and property if you can. So it's the job of the grand jury to restrain government, restrain the prosecutor. Then I'd like your comments. Is falsity and lying part of the culture of politics?
Some people say you can tell when a politician's lying when their mouth starts moving. That's not true in all cases, but maybe often.
People laugh about that, and the reason they laugh when people say that, made me laugh, is because it's true. The truth will make you laugh. It's either cry or laugh. I laugh. Well, that's been my observation too. And if they are telling the truth, they're doing it to get what they want. Why? That's the nature of electoral process majority principle. You're out to get what you want, and we hope that what they want is a good thing. I wouldn't accuse Dan of that. I know he went to legislature. I'm sure from all I know about him, he wanted what was good, but it was still what he wanted. But remember, folks, what most people want is what they want, and it's not good. It's selfish. That's what it comes down to in politics. That's why we have courts. That's why we have 3 co-equal branches of government. That's why we have the grand jury, to try to put the brakes on the inherent selfishness of mankind. Back to you, Dan. This is Brent Allan Winters, commonlawyer.com, www.commonlawyer.com. Go to the website, commonlawyer.com, and find Winters Inn. And join the course there. There are many courses you can take, and they're all in the can, audio and visual, but find the course there on the grand jury. You can take that course. And many other courses, coming up on comparative law, comparing and contrasting. The only 2 traditions of religion, law, and government available to us, the law of the land and the law of the city, comparing and contrasting them, are common law, the law of the land. So we can understand it better. You can join that course. Brent Allan Winters, commonlawyer.com, along with Dan Scadam here. Join us for the rest of our comment on the grand jury.